Hey Warriors, this is Unit 11, Lesson 5, Part 2. Here we're going to talk about categories of drugs that include depressants, hallucinogens, opioids. So let's get it going with alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant. So depressants slow neural activity and body functions. Alcohol is a disinhibitor and works on impulse control in the brain. It creates a relax effect, as you see here, liquid courage. Here's some fun facts. More than $86 billion are spent annually on alcoholic beverages. Alcohol is involved in 60% of all crimes, and alcohol is involved in over 70% of sexually related crimes. Reasons why? Well, because it's a disinhibitor. It slows brain activity that controls judgment and inhibitions. Our frontal lobe activity, alcohol slows it down. And so helpful tendencies, like if a person's at a restaurant and they've had too much to drink, they might leave an exorbitant tip that they would not do otherwise because their judgment and their reasoning is impaired. It slows neural processing. Low doses of alcohol relax the drinker by slowing the sympathetic nervous system. Larger doses causes reactions to slow, speech to slur, and skilled performance to deteriorate. This is why a lot of people make the fateful decision to drink and drive. Reasoning and judgment is impaired, and then when they get behind the wheel, reaction time is slowed because of the sympathetic nervous system's neural disinhibitors. In experiments, virtually all drinkers who had insisted when sober that they would not drive under the influence later decided to drive home from a bar, even when given a breathalyzer test and told they were intoxicated. Memory is disrupted under the use of alcohol. It can disrupt memory formation, and heavy drinking can have long-term effects on the brain. And that is due to REM sleep, disrupting REM sleep. In rats, a developmental period corresponding to human adolescence, binge drinking contributes to nerve cell death and reduces the birth of new nerve cells. It also impairs the growth of synaptic connections. Brain cells are stopped regenerating and the connections are not being made. In humans, heavy drinking may lead to blackouts, in which a drinker is unable to recall people they met the night before, what they said or did while intoxicated, and these blackouts result partly from the way alcohol suppresses REM sleep. So this is why we pair studying sleep with psychoactive drug use, because we disrupt sleep and we know how important sleep can be. Prolonged and excessive drinking characterized by alcohol dependence can shrink the brain, and you're going to see that in this brain, which one looks healthier. It's reduced self-awareness and self-control while under the use of alcohol. In one experiment, those who consumed alcohol rather than a placebo were doubly likely to be caught mind-wandering during a reading task, yet were less likely to notice that they were zoned out. Reduced self-awareness may help explain why people who want to suppress their awareness of failures may choose to drink, because then it puts that out of their mind. They don't have to think about this. Just like with other drugs, if we have the expectation of a certain result while under the influence, then that can influence the outcome of using. So when people believe that alcohol affects social behavior in certain ways and believe rightly or wrongly that they've been drinking alcohol, they will behave accordingly. So as you can see here, this brain scan on the left, this is a scan of a woman with alcohol dependence, and the one on the right, somebody without alcohol dependence. You can see that the one on the left has some places missing. Okay, barbiturates are our next depressant, and they depress nervous system activity. Barbiturates such as Nembutal, Seconal, and Amytal are sometimes prescribed to induce sleep or reduce anxiety. In larger doses, they can impair memory and judgment. If combined with alcohol, as sometimes happens when people take a sleeping pill after an evening of heavy drinking, the total depressive effect on body functions can be lethal. Hallucinogens are a third category. Here we'll take a closer look at LSD. So LSD was developed in 1943 when Albert Hofmann accidentally ingested it. LSD stands for lysergic acid diethylamide. The result, according to Hoffman, is an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscope play of colors. Users of LSD claim that it expands consciousness and opens new worlds. Sometimes people are convinced that they have achieved great insights while using LSD, but its effects wear off. They often are unable to recall or use these discoveries. LSD's effects are not predictable. Some LSD experiences are so frightening that the users, in a state of panic and confusion, injure themselves seriously or even commit suicide. In addition, some users of LSD experience lasting side effects. The high include memory loss, violent outbursts, nightmares, and feelings of panic. Another long-term effect people experience flashbacks. Flashbacks are these hallucinations that happen weeks, months, and even years after using LSD. Some psychologists even have flashbacks that stem from the chemical changes in the brain. They believe that they come from the chemical changes in the brain. Now, marijuana, for over 5,000 years, hemp's been cultivated for its fiber, including people like George Washington and other founding fathers. However, they grew it for its fiber that could be used for clothing, for construction materials, and for paper. The leaves and flowers of this plant, which are sold as marijuana, contain THC. Whether smoked or eaten, THC produces a mix of effects. Marijuana is sometimes difficult to classify because it's a mild hallucinogen. It may produce sensitivity to colors, sounds, tastes, and smells, but like alcohol, it also relaxes and disinhibits. So it may produce this euphoric high. Both operating an automobile and other machinery is not suggested while under the use of marijuana because it can impair motor coordination and perceptual skills. Marijuana and alcohol also differ in the fact that the body eliminates alcohol within hours, and THC and its byproduct linger in the body for weeks or longer, which means that regular users may achieve a high with smaller amounts of the drug than the occasional user. A user's experience can vary with the situation, much like the others. If the person feels anxious or depressed, using marijuana may intensify those feelings, and the more often the person uses marijuana, especially during adolescence, the greater the risk of anxiety and depression. So it can induce those things. Or not induce, but it can make them larger. If daily use has a worse outcome than infrequent use, marijuana also disrupts memory formation and interferes with immediate recall of learned information only a few minutes before. Such cognitive effects outlast the period of smoking. Heavy adult use for 20 years is associated with shrinkage of brain areas that process memories and emotions. And prenatal exposure through maternal marijuana use impairs brain development. Some states and countries are relaxing their controls on marijuana, and it can be used for medical purposes to relieve pain, nausea associated with such things like AIDS and cancer. In these cases, the Institute of Medicine recommends delivering THC with medical inhalers. That way you don't have to smoke it because, like cigarette smoke, marijuana smoke can damage the lungs. And here we have opioids and opiates, that is sometimes listed in their own category of psychoactive drug. The opiates, opium and its derivatives, morphine and heroin, also depress neural functioning, pupils constrict, breathing slows, lethargy sets in, and a blissful pleasure replaces pain and anxiety. For this short-term pleasure, opiate users may pay a long-term price, though, as a gnawing craving for another fix, a need for progressively larger doses, and extreme discomfort of withdrawal. When repeatedly flooded with artificial opiates, the brain eventually stops producing endorphins and dopamine. So like I said with methamphetamines, our body stops producing the things that we naturally get when we add artificial neurotransmitters. And so that's what causes the withdrawal.
Every 19 minutes, someone dies from an accidental drug overdose. Most of the time, it's from prescription drugs like oxycodone or hydrocodone. These drugs all belong to a family of drugs called opioids. They are prescribed to dull pain, but they also boost dopamine, giving some people a high. They can also slow down your breathing and are highly addictive. So why is it so easy to get hooked? Well, for one, your body can build up a tolerance, so that the more you use, the larger dose you need to get the same effect. Secondly, you can become dependent on them. In fact, your body creates natural opioids that are released when you hurt yourself. But if you habitually use painkillers, your body stops producing its own and relies on the drugs instead. If you try and stop then, the body goes through withdrawal. Consider this. In 2012, there were 259 million prescriptions written for opioid painkillers, nearly enough for every American adult and child to have their own bottle of pills. Look, we need to treat pain, but we also don't need to treat everything with the pill.
Drug use by North American youth increased during the 1970s. Then with drug education and more realistic media depiction of drug use, it declined sharply. After the early 1990s, the cultural anti-drug violence softened, and drugs for a time were again glamorized in some music and films. Drug use increased. So which drug has a rising trend? And as you can see here, marijuana use is on the rise. So if many people have experimented with drugs, why are there regular users and people who just quit? Well, what makes a person more likely to try or to continue to use all have to do with the following. Okay, so regular drug use. Why do we have people who use drugs regularly versus not? On the left there, you've got your social cultural influences, which may include access to drugs, cultural attitudes towards drug use, and peer influences. So I'm going to assume that in an urban environment, it might be a little bit easier to obtain and use drugs. In the middle, psychological influences, lacking a sense of purpose, that should say. So as we mentioned with alcohol, if a person goes through a breakup and they want to dull the pain, that's a psychological influence. Stress, psych disorders, depression, mental illness. A lot of mentally ill will self-prescribe alcohol or other medication for themselves because they don't know. If a person's hearing voices in their head, one way to shut those voices up is to drink alcohol. Again, it suppresses the voices because the things in the brain are slowed down. And finally, biological influences with drug use is genetic tendencies. So if you have a twin that uses, that's going to increase the chance that you're going to. And the dopamine reward circuit, we can get addicted because it gives us good feeling stuff. Overall, drugs are bad unless they're medically prescribed. Yeah.